Welcome to the Photoshop editing section. So what we're going to do now, we've learned the basics, and now we're going to learn how to really edit photography and photos. And as a graphic designer, you're most likely going to receive and work with photos that are not edited, and it's going to be up to you to tweak it to make it match a project. A lot of times clients will take their own photography for their restaurant or a picture of their product, and it's less than desired. And it's your job to make sure it looks excellent, sharp, bright, and matches the mood of the design. So we're going to learn some very basic things here. In the downloadable files as part of the course, you'll have 4 different photo assets that we're going to use in this section. The first one is a texture. The second one is an hourglass. The third one, a piano. And the fourth one, a plant. And these are all photos I took in my own home with a very simple iPhone X. I did 0 prior editing to these photos. These are right off my phone. And the reason I wanted to do this is when I taught this section before, I would take photos off those awesome photo websites like pexels.com, and a lot of those were already really well done and professionally edited photos by photographers. What I wanted to do is teach you how to edit photos that are right off of a phone or right off of a camera that need that final touch. The first photo, which is going to be the hourglass. We're going to just drag that right into Photoshop as a new document. You can also go to File, Open, and find it that way too. You'll notice when you open it as a new document that we don't have smart objects on, like we talked about in the prior lesson. We can simply right-click and just make sure that smart objects are on, convert to smart object. We're going to need that when we're doing our adjustments. So now that it's a smart object and we can tell because of the icon, we are going to really dive into the adjustments panel. So remember in the first few lessons of Photoshop, we talked about how you can go up to image, go up to adjustments, and this is kind of where all of your photo editing tools live, is right up here. But there's also a panel that you can pull up called adjustments, which has a lot of these same settings. They're really the same options. If you do not see the adjustments panel, simply go up to Window and just make sure adjustments is checked. So here's the difference, and don't worry if you get a little bit confused. It's a little confusing because you can access it through the panel or you can access it here, but it does things a little bit differently. So when I go up to Image, Adjustments, and let's say I want to add a little bit of brightness and contrast to this photo, I can select Brightness and Contrast. And we're going to have some sliders here, and we can increase the brightness, which it does exactly what it says. It's going to bring out all of those highlights and make them more white or lighter. And let's say we want to add contrast. So that's going to change the difference between all the white pixels and the dark pixels. It's going to go ahead and add more dramatic differences between the two. So it's going to make your darker pixels darker and your lighter pixels lighter. So let's go ahead and increase the contrast. We're going to click OK. This is just to demonstrate what happens if we go this route and we go to Image Adjustments. And you'll notice because I have this as a smart layer, any adjustment that I add, it's going to add it as a smart filter, because if you add any kind of filter or adjustment on a smart layer, it's going to be a smart filter. What is amazing about this is I can toggle this on and off. So I'm just doing the visibility on and off, so that's before and after. And I can also delete it. So if I just click this smart layer and drag, I can delete that layer and I'm back to my original photo. If this wasn't a smart layer, so let's just right click, rasterize layer, and it was just a regular layer, I can go up to Image, Adjustments, and do the same thing. Brightness, contrast. Let's make it really dramatic so we can see the difference. Click OK, and notice I don't have that extra smart filter. I can't delete it. Once it's done, it's over. I can't go back and change anything. I can go back in my history panel and go back one step. But let's say I've already done 5 other edits to it. I changed the color and sharpened it and did several things. I have to go all the way back to this step if I wanted to change or adjust anything. So let's go back in our history panel to right before we rasterized the layer, and now it's back as a smart object. So I can go back to Image, Adjustments, Brightness, Contrast, make it really bright, and let's say, oh, that's overprocessed, didn't like that. I have the smart filter where I can go to select brightness and contrast. I can double click the text brightness and contrast and it'll pull up slider and I can bring it right back down to a normal level, maybe not quite as bad, and change the contrast and click OK. And I can adjust it again and again and again, and I don't have to go back in my history panel. I can continue to edit this, and I can manage all sorts of smart filters. So every adjustment I can make I can go back and edit it again without changing everything else in the document. So let's delete this smart filter. I'm just going to click and drag it into the trash can. And let's start fresh. And we're going to do most of these adjustments. And this is where it gets a little complicated, but you can rewatch the video. We'll do lots of this practice in the future. But if you were to add let's say this is a smart object, I am adding brightness and contrast, and I did some kind of adjustment. And you see how the main photo is a parent, and the smart filter is a child. So this smart filter only applies to this layer, and that's it. I can't drag this filter anywhere else to affect a second photo that was on the page. So let's drag another photo in just for an example. Let's drag this piano photo in. So this piano photo is unaffected by the smart filter, even if I drag it underneath. The brightness is not applied to that piano photo. But if I were to go a different route and I use the adjustments panel right here, it'll apply the same filter, smart filter, but it'll do so not dependent on that layer. So let's start fresh. We just have 2 images as an example. And instead, we're going to use this adjustments panel. Instead of going up to image, adjustments, and adding it, we're going to add it through the adjustments panel. So let's do hue and saturation. And let's do kind of a pretty big shift in the hue. And let's make it highly saturated. So that made a dramatic effect on that layer. But notice that this layer is not affected. But this is now its own layer, as before it was nested as a child. And it was only affecting that one layer and I couldn't move it. This I can bring on the top and affect all the layers in the document. So now all the layers are affected by this hue and saturation. I can toggle it on and off, and I can also delete it. So there's 2 different ways you can add adjustments. Really, if you were to add image adjustments through the top image menu system, it'll do it only on that layer that you select. If you do it as a part of adjustments, it'll do its own independent layer, which you can move around. So there's benefits to both methods. There's no wrong or right way. It just really depends on how you want to use the filters. If you want it to affect everything in the document, then use your adjustments panel window. If you just want it to affect that one layer and that's it, then I would go up to image and adjustments and just affect the one layer. It's a little confusing, but don't worry. This is probably one of the more difficult aspects of Photoshop.